All right.
So I'm very lucky I got my promotion on show Beauty Over Power. And this is a Swami to Swami talk. So normally with Srila Bhakti Sudhir Goswami Maharaj, we talk very privately about different things. And today we have a great chance to interview him publicly. So how are you, Maharaj? Very happy to see you.
I am very happy that you are very happy.
Oh, great. Well, today I represent many of our viewers for different countries who's very excited to hear your spiritual talks. But you know, they're always asking us questions. And on their behalf, I would like to ask you a few questions. And
sure.
One of the questions about special time. We feel that you've got a great opportunity to connect with Krishna consciousness on 70s. It's a magic time which never happened in the rest of the world. In Russia, it's happening at a very small level. In China, we don't know whether it's going to happen or not. In India, it was a particular movement amongst popular culture, but everybody knows Beatles, America, Srila Prabhupada, Hare Krishna. It's almost the legend. So how did you get into this circumstance?
Well, there are different ways to think about that. You have your own personal reflections in life that seem to change or alter in time. Something that happened to you many years ago, there's the way you saw it at that time, the way you saw it 10 years later, maybe how you see it 40 years later. And all those ways of seeing have some validity. So there's like a sociological way of talking, as you're speaking, historically, sociologically, the 1960s. And even when I joined, a professor from the Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley, named Stilson Judah, he was doing the research for a book that later became known as Hare Krishna and the Counterculture. So within days of my joining in San Francisco in 1971, May, we were filling out sociological surveys. What sort of income did you come from? What was your religious background, your level of education? He was taking all of that to analyze why were young people at this time getting involved in spiritual movements from the East.
Why?
Well, as I say, there's a sociological point of view, there are personal perspectives, there are theological ways of viewing it. You look in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna will say, Chatur vidha bhajante mam jana sukritin Arjuna. He says, Arjun, there are 4 types of people who get involved in the Krishna consciousness movement. And then he says, what are their circumstances? Those who are economically distressed, those who are inquisitive, jigyasa, art, gyan, and those who are seriously searching for something spiritually. Different reasons might lead someone to engage in spiritual pursuit.
So you joined when you were 16.
Well, I joined, I was 19. But I started having exposure when I was around 16, 17.
You know, for us, people like Steve Jobs, John Lennon, many others, they're the cult personalities, and every one of them on some level had connection with Krishna consciousness. So for us, it's very clearly indication that there was some kind of miracle time where a special group of people descend on earth and they actually want to change the world, and they did on a particular level, maybe not the way they would really see it. So why you went deeper into like spiritual studies when all other guys took something in Krishna consciousness they felt very valuable for them, but went into kind of social or business way? But it seems like you went deeper.
Well, one thing we could say about this is, just from a little bit of a literary historical analysis. There's a group of poets or writers, thinkers, called the American Transcendentalists. And 3 names to remember: Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman, Walt Whitman. These men had some appreciation for Indian theistic culture. Indian culture as a whole, but the theistic element is inseparable from it. So they read Bhagavad Gita and other such books. Right? We hear that famous quote, who is it? Thoreau saying, "In the morning I bathe my mind in the cosmogonal glory of the Bhagavad Gita," which our modern literature seems puny and trivial in comparison. So they had a great appreciation for that. We know, those pursuing Krishna consciousness, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur also had some appreciation for Emerson. So when he wrote his Bhagavat speech, it's Emersonian in style, even by example, but he spins the examples in a new way. At any rate, there is a group of what we call avant-garde, what I like to call the avant-garde esprit, the cutting edge of spiritual thinkers in the 20th century. And they were known in the beginning as Bohemians, later as beatniks by the 50s. And that means Allan Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, Gregory Corso, some others. And they had this fascination with India and Indian thought and Indian philosophy because they're mainly under the influence of Walt Whitman, the great American poet, who wrote a famous book called Song of Myself. He's like singing the glories of self, of Atma, you could say, but in a more abstract, impersonal way, as opposed to a deeply personal conception of self, understanding the unified nature of everything. But anyway, those beat poets were under the influence of the American Transcendentalists, and that awakened in them the interest to visit India. So they went to India, like so many people do, and they were astonished by what they found. You know, like I remember being at the train station in Mathura once. I was in line. There are like, say, 4 lines there. I'm in a line. And the line next to me was a fully grown, mature bull. White cow, with big horns in the line. Was the only person in that line. Right? And so everybody else, and anywhere else in the world, they would send a television crew. This is India. Everyone's just in line. You understand?
Yes.
So when you go to India, you see things that are forever going to change the way you view your life, the world, existence, reality. And the famous writer V.S. Naipaul was at a literary party. Some ladies, they were like telling him, "Oh, Mr. Naipaul, we're going to visit India." And he said, "Oh, that's nice." He said, "But visiting India is not like visiting Paris." He said, "When you go to India, you are going to see things, feel things, and experience things that are going to forever change the way that you are. You won't be the same." Right? So just to cap this, so when Allan Ginsberg, you talk about John Lennon, Steve Jobs, etc. Steve Jobs would know what I'm talking about because we're of a similar age group. So these people were in the 50s. They went to India and came back with something in the early 60s. And one of the things he came back with was the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So when I was 13, 14 years old, I'm watching public television in New York, Channel 13, NET, National Educational Television. So there's Allan Ginsberg, and he's got a harmonium. And he's one of our gurus. For us who grew up at that time, we revere him, this revered poet, modern thinker, avant-garde esprit. He's got a harmonium and he's singing Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. He's singing the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So that Allan Ginsberg there's a circle, a group of writers, thinkers, very progressive thinkers at the time. They're living in Greenwich Village in New York, which is where the Bohemians lived, and then the beatniks, and now the hippies. And that's where, by Krishna's inconceivable will, Srila Prabhupada landed in New York, is in the midst of this group. So after a year of nothing substantial happening, Prabhupada he came with trunks of Bhagavatams. I had the good fortune to get one, the so-called brown Bhagavatams that he published in India. And he put them in bookstores. He's always trying to preach, do some programs. No real success to show for it. Writing back to India, God brothers are not willing to help him. So after 1 year, he's thinking, I'm trying to fulfill my Gurudev's order, my Guru Maharaj's order, so I'll return to India. And he came by boat, the Scindia steamship line, so he goes down to the docks where those boats are to see when is the next boat back to India, which he has right from the president of the company to travel free. So they have on a chalkboard, next, Jaladuta, some date. So he's thinking, when that next ship goes back to India, I'm going. That's why this is like a classic Hollywood story.
Right.
It's got all the drama. He's on his way back to India, our hero. He's leaving defeated, epic fail. Right? He tried his best. And while he's there looking at that sign, he's walking around the street, and one person from that Ginsberg group, Howard Wheeler, he says, there's Prabhupada in his sannyas dress with his little white shoes from India and his cane and looking so angelic. Saragrahi Vaishnav soul, thou art an angel fair. Howard Wheeler says to him, are you from India? Am I from India? Let me tell you about it. I'm from Goloka Vrindavan, okay? I descended from him.
He could not understand at that very moment yet.
Right, he's not ready to hear that yet. But and who is Howard Wheeler? He later becomes Hayagriva Prabhu, the editor of the Bhagavatam, Charitamritam, everything. So he's an English professor at a prestigious university in America. So Krishna arranges Prabhupada at his nadir, there's zenith and nadir, at his lowest point. He's ready to return to India, a failure, so to speak, from one point of view. Who connects with him? An English professor. Prabhupada needs an editor. He wants to make books. And through that English professor, he met Allan Ginsberg and so many other people. And interestingly, when Prabhupada made the original GBC of ISKCON, Allan Ginsberg was the GBC of Australia.
Wow. Unbelievable.
And I can't think of a better choice for our friends in Oz.
Well,
so at that time, I'm at home in New Jersey, watching on the TV, I'm 14, and I see Allan Ginsberg with his harmonium chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Also around this time, he has some visa trouble. And they're thinking of not extending his visa. But Allan Ginsberg really likes Prabhupada. He likes talking, getting his association. He gives harmoniums to Prabhupada. If you wonder, how did Prabhupada get the harmonium? Allan Ginsberg gave it to him. Because he liked them, he bought many in India. So Prabhupada is on the verge of deportation. His visa's expired or overextending. So Allan Ginsberg, because he's a famous poet, and the Kennedy brothers, they have some literary affinity. They like poets, literature. So Bobby Kennedy He's the Attorney General of the United States at the time. So Allan Ginsberg calls him and says, there's a Swami here who's good for America, and we need to keep him here. And in New York, they're giving him some trouble about his visa extension. Could you take care of it? And he's saying, sure, Allan, whatever you want. So then Allan Ginsberg says, and I've got something for you. Remember, he's the Attorney General of the United States, JFK's brother. He's looking out his window. He can see all those buildings in Washington. What is it? And Allan Ginsberg starts going, Hare Krishna. He plays the Maha Mantra to him over the phone. And he's listening, and he goes, very good, very nice. And he points to where the president is, and he says, I think he needs it more than me, but...
Well, what you're telling right now is perfect script for Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
And I hope one day it will be...
We'll settle for Bollywood.
Well, I mean, I'll talk to my people there, and I'm sure we can cut a deal. And by the way, if Indians watching us right now, I would be rushing,
Yes.
As an agent. But anyway, this is an amazing story, which not only moved people's heart, it moved the world.
Yes.
And moved a lot. So
Yeah.
when I was with Siddhanti Maharaj, one of our friends, we were in line.
Yes.
And one old woman told in vegetarian restaurant, she said,
Yes.
if you guys wouldn't come in 70s, we wouldn't have all these beautiful vegetarian restaurants around country. So tell me
I
about
think
that
there's some
special
truth to
time.
that.
So how people connect with that.
Again, different people differently, but...
And I want to know your personal experience about your friends.
All right, I can speak from my perspective. So, and people like me and my friends, we were raised in relative affluence of middle-class America. So it means we had no material wants, relatively speaking. So the idea that we should become middle-class people, like go to school, come out of school, get a job, work 9 to 5, have a wife and a family, we didn't feel any obligation to do that.
You were already in this circumstance since you...
We saw what it was, so we said, maybe I'll do something different than that. I'm conferring upon myself the liberty to not do that. And there are other people like me who agree that that's the last thing we want to do. Right? So you mentioned musicians, people like that. So I was listening to people who their songs were, as you might say, anti-materialistic. So they had an anti-materialistic message that was resonating within me. And so people like myself, we felt at the same time alienated from normal society. So that led us to explore alternatives. That's what it was about. We're not going to argue that one time's better than another time, one time's more special than another time. Every period has some unique aspect. And we'll see sometimes devotees, they'll say, they like some particular age of the Krishna consciousness movement, but I never heard substantially anyone in the Guru Varga get nostalgic about 1935 or 1874 was a great year. Or so I would joke with them and say, yeah, 500 years ago was really good. If you're going to get into some former time, 500 years ago, Mahaprabhu, the Panchatattva.
But we're still talking about very special time and connection. And
well, that's what I'm trying to say is, if there was something special about it, and there's some parallel to now, it's about the ability or the opportunity to explore alternatives.
One thing, what my impression
Alternative culture, alternative lifestyle, alternative worldview. So that age lent itself to that at the time. Where the parallel comes now is because of the internet. So at that time, you had to literally get on a boat or an airplane to go to another part of the world to experience how people think, how they view life, meaning of life, purpose of life, goal of life, their lifestyle. Now, through the medium of the internet, you have exposure to all cultures instantly.
One interesting point which saturates with me about that time, at that time many people
Resonate with you.
resonate. At that time many people believe that world and even themselves can be changed to the song, because the song become a symbol of freedom, liberty, free thinking, more than probably ever.
Well, one thing to factor in before that is that fear of death. When people think they're going to die, all of a sudden they start viewing everything differently. Right? It's a common sense thing. If you know you're going to die next week, then it becomes very clear to you certain things you'll do or not do. How you're going to manage your time. You mentioned Steve Jobs. He says that too. When he found out, more or less, that he was dying, it really helped him be decisive. Right? And why do I say this? Because now, reflecting back upon it, something that we didn't mention was the Vietnam War. So there were two things on the death side of the equation. One was the Vietnam War. So if young people thought, you're 18 years old and you're going to be drafted and go in the military and go across the world and either kill or be killed, they're thinking, why? Couldn't understand why they should be doing that. This was not like wars before where it was very clear. It was not so clear. So people did not want to do that. Right? So they had death in front of them in a realistic way. A realistic possibility of dying while you're young. So then you start thinking, well, what do I want to do with my time? I may not live to be 40. You know, I might not live to be 30. What should I be doing now with my time? Right, that was one side, and on the other side was nuclear war. So at that time, because of the tension between the United States and the former Soviet Union, there's people living under the threat of total annihilation. So on the one hand, you got like the threat of nuclear war. On the other hand, locally, the threat of being drafted in the military and going 10,000 miles across the world to fight. It made a lot of people start thinking about, what do I want to do with my life? With this time that I have that's so precious, how do I want to spend that time? What would be the best use of my time? And that's why a lot of people turn towards spiritual culture.
This is a very interesting point, actually, because, see, 60s and 70s, in our imaginations, the younger generations, kind of a miracle time. But you point very important, the society in fear of war, under threat of big Soviet enemy, and really can't understand what is the clear values of life. But again, going to music and art.
Well, so in that time, then the artists and musicians, they start representing dissident voices and alternative thought, because they're observing the same things also. So that's why so much of the music of that period is infused with some, underlying spiritual concept, or about peace, world unity. It's tending towards the spiritual side of things. But as one, Joni Mitchell said, who comes from that era, he said a little cynically, but to make a point, she said, by the end of the 60s, we realized we couldn't save the world. By the end of the 70s, we realized we couldn't save ourselves. So in the 80s, we just decided to make money. As I said, she said that a little sarcastically, but it's not far from the truth.
Right.
So when the threat of war went away, the nuclear threat went away, that impending doom, what's called in Sanskrit literature, smashana vairagya. Like if we go to a funeral, everyone's there, oh, life is so short, at any time, any one of us can die, I feel, and that a day later, you don't feel like that. 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5, it's business as usual.
But still, going back into this concept of the sound and song of that generation and divine sound, because as far as I understand, Prabhupada, he very clearly started his movement with Maha Mantra and Prasadam.
Right.
So the society were searching for something in art and music, the answers for their questions.
So people, one of the things we can see is what's sometimes called tribal music. Right? Beating on drums, dancing, and going with the flow. So Srila Prabhupada, he'd go in a park where there's young people, and they're beating on drums and dancing around and just sort of whimsically singing. And so he goes with his mridanga and some kartals, and he starts playing on a drum, but having Krishna Kirtan. And those people who are with their drums, and they're thinking, oh, this is nice. They're simple-hearted people. But this has a little more structure to it than what they're doing. So they start dancing to his drum and song. So this is what you call causeless mercy. They're just being swept up by the moment, thinking it's fun. But now they're singing and dancing Maha Mantra, and afterwards they're feeling some benefit from doing that. And he is telling them, oh, I have classes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday over on 26 2nd Avenue, which is in the heart of Greenwich Village. So they come to his classes.
Tricky question.
Yes.
See, the time has traveled all over the planet, because the 70s in America might start today in China or even in India.
Or we've seen, you mentioned Russia, China, you can see in some instances 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s at one time.
Right.
Not that they'll just have their 60s, then they'll have their, no, not like that. They'll have some elements of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the present.
About India, because you frequent traveler, you're going to India many times. You see many young people, and I know now some Indians watching us.
Yes.
Would you imagine that something like this would be happen in India in near future or now?
Well, here's my assessment of India, is that previously, due to British occupation, the Indian people were led falsely to believe that European civilization was superior to Vedic culture. They never really believed that in their hearts, but circumstantially they were at a disadvantage. Right? And they were occupied. So there was a period where Indians had to do this delicate dance about, aspects of Vedic culture as viewed by European civilization. Back to your original question. Adunikibat, modern educated people, how they can deal with it. But what we've seen in the last 20 years, particularly, is that young educated Indians who've been to Silicon Valley, they're in the IT industry, they're computer literate, they're from fine schools, they're fluent in English. They know they don't have to be apologetic about their culture. And in fact, they can make a case for being a superior culture to so-called Western civilization. When I was a child, growing up, and I would look at the books that were in the class ahead of me to see what I had to look forward to. And I can never forget seeing on the shelf a book called Western Civilization. So I thought, well, I looked through it, it's interesting. And my first question to my brothers and others, I said, where's the book on Eastern civilization? And they all laughed. No, it's just Western, the class is called Western civilization. I mean, I don't understand. There isn't a book called Eastern civilization? No. See, we believe civilization started in the West, in Greece. And saying, you mean there's no book called Eastern civilization that predates Western civilization? No, we don't study that. Why? So when they asked Gandhi, that famous question where they say to Gandhi, you know, Mahatma Ji, what do you think about Western civilization? And he quipped, I think it would be a good idea. So he wasn't buying into this idea that the Europeans have something superior.
Sure.
So this is the point. So what we've seen in the last 20, 30 years, with the IT, internet industry, that modern educated Indians no longer feel the need to be apologetic about their beliefs, about Vedic culture, Vedic civilization, and they're quite comfortable with these things in modern environment. I'll give you a practical example. Stem cell research is a moral dilemma for many doctors, Judeo-Christian doctors in the Western world. But they've found by analysis and survey, it's not a problem for Indian doctors or Indian scientists. Why? They say, oh, we have this, Mahabharata, the Puranas, we have all these kind of things. It's not an issue for us. So I'll conclude this part. So this new generation of Indians who are internet literate, they're highly educated, they're professionals, there's a resurgence and their appreciation for Vedic culture and the dissemination of Vedic culture. And the UN, UNESCO, did a report in the last 2 years with their prediction, their indicators for the future, that just like my generation, the so-called baby boomers, because we are the largest affluent middle class in the world, we dictate world taste. So that's why everyone has to be subjected to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Levi's and all these things that our generation likes. The world taste has been held hostage by the baby boom. What we like, everyone else has to more or less be subjected to it, because it's about numbers and market and buying power. So, but what the UNESCO report says, that by around 2050, it's 2013 while I'm saying this, at 2050, the largest affluent middle class in the world will be located in India. And their taste and their buying patterns, all of these things, will influence world style and culture. So this group who will be comfortable with Vedic culture, Vedic civilization, and the Krishna consciousness movement, they'll be dictating world taste by 2050.